The Majesty's Men is a multifaceted enterprise for maximizing men and glorifying God. We wage war, together as men for men, promoting the patriarchy by equipping and encouraging Christian men to throw off indolence and passivity, embrace virtuous masculinity, take dominion and protect, provide, and preside as the adopted sons and heirs of God's kingdom we are. The Majesty's Men host the Honor God Network, an alliance of exemplary men in their ministries, projects, businesses, and churches all around the world. In this weekly show, we speak with the numerous men of the Honor God Network, along with special guests and friends of the network, all about the understanding and application of God's timeless truth to the timely topics and events of today. We seek to work out godly wisdom on mission as men in every domain of life, leading and blessing our families, churches, and societies as we go. We seek to unashamedly apply every bit of God's Word to every bit of God's world, creating culture and building Christendom so that we, or those who come after us, may see every knee bow before our King as we fill the earth with the glory of God for the good of all people. Join us in the fight and the fun.
Welcome to the Majesty's Men Show. I want to thank you guys so much for coming back. This has been a lot of fun for us. I hope it's been a lot of fun for you. And today we're going to be talking about something that's been really impactful to all the three guys that are on here today, which is Bo and Riley. I guess we should go ahead and say, hey guys, give everybody a shout out.
So hello.
There we go. And I've learned a lot from these guys. They're going to talk based on just personal experience of building and having several sources of revenue and having productive property. But this is a concept that's been really impactful from us, from C.R. Wiley's book, Man of the House. We're actually going to have him on at some point to talk about this as well. And listener, whether you've known about productive property, passive income, maybe you've been an investor, maybe you've owned properties for years, I think this conversation is going to be helpful for you. And I think for a lot of guys over the last couple of years, learning from C.R. Wiley has been really intellectually stimulating. It's been encouraging, and it's really set a bunch of men in a positive direction, thinking about how can we get a side hustle that's not just a side hustle for 6 months, but I can build generational wealth. And so we're going to talk through all those things today. I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then I'm going to pass it off to Bo to kind of give a little bit better of a definition and talk about some anti-fragility stuff. And then I want to jump over to you, Riley, after we talk to Bo, because I really want to hear about generational wealth. Like, why is that an important thing? Because after all, probably all of us read John Piper and took some things that he didn't necessarily intend for us to take and embrace some sort of poverty theology at some point. So we want to get a positive vision for a biblical understanding of generational wealth. But let's pray, and then Bo will pass it off to you. Father, I thank you for the collection of these men that you've gathered with the Honor God Network. I thank you for this opportunity we have to encourage and build up men and train men and thinking through how to have productive property, how to think multi-generationally, and how to make decisions with great grandchildren in mind. And God, help us to understand and root things biblically. Help us to know that you have called us to some really good things, not just for this moment in time, for today, but also for if you allow us to live that long, also for the raising of our children and the seeing of our children raise our grandchildren, and helping us to make our life impactful for them. And just guide this discussion I trust you're going to today. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Bo, talk to us about productive property and what that means to help build an anti-fragile home, and how that might be important for men who are listening in.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the idea of productive property, it's pretty self-explanatory in the words. So it's property that is productive. It's not property that you just necessarily own, but it's something that can give you a living and that you can really build your life around. And that's the vision put forth in Man of the House. And, he's a pastor, he's a minister of the gospel, but he has found a way to bring together these two worlds, of the quote unquote secular and the sacred. He's a full-time pastor, but he's got things on the side that he's been able to live an anti-fragile life, that he's been able to speak the truth, that he's been able to have a lot of impact in his community. And that whole idea of anti-fragility, I think, is a huge motivating factor behind productive property. So, anti-fragility is this concept that is kind of been tossed around in the last couple of years. Nicholas Taleb wrote this book where he talks about it, but essentially, to be anti-fragile is really the thing that we should pursue as men in this society. And it's essentially, there's things that we interact with in our world that are fragile. There's things that we interact with in our existence that are robust, and there's things that are anti-fragile. And we want to be in the anti-fragile category. And I use the example of a plate, right? When you drop a plate, there's a good likelihood it's going to break because it's fragile. And we don't want to be like that. We don't want to break when stress comes, when the hard times come. We don't want to be we don't want to be like a plate. But there's also, a stone. If you think about a stone, if you drop a stone, it's not going to have much effect to it at all. When you put it under stress, when you put it under difficulty and pressure, a stone's not going to do anything. But there's those things that are in our life that we experience that are anti-fragile, that actually grow and get better under stress and get better under the pressure. And that's where we want to be. And we think about what that is in our life. That's your muscles, right? In order to grow your muscles, you've got to put them under stress and strain. You've got to tear them up so that they can build back better. And that's what we are seeking to do, to be anti-fragile. When the hard time comes, whether economically, spiritually, in your family, in the culture, you want to be in a place to where when you're put into the oven and put under pressure and put under stress and strain, that you're not going to break, you're not going to stay the same, but you're actually going to be anti-fragile and get better and grow and be stronger. So that's the idea of anti-fragility, and this whole idea of productive property is at least one way to pursue that lifestyle. So yeah.
That's good. Now, I mean, for seasons like we've been in the last year and a half, and probably what we're going into late summer, early fall of 2021, anti-fragility is so crucial. And being that stone, as you call it, I love that, how you shape that up for us. But being anti-fragile is really crucial in times where things are shut down and you're thinking, maybe your job has been, completely cut off because you're not, you're in lockdown, you're not getting paid or something like that. Anti-fragility is really crucial, especially in 2020 and 2021. And that's huge. All right. So thinking about that, Riley has been encouraging to me and challenging to me really over the last 6 months. My investment madness, I can pretty much attribute to Riley both. And it ended up going from purchasing a home. I put another home, a second home, to be able to Airbnb. And then it went to several different other options. And now I finally landed on remodeling a pop-up camper. And I'm going to start Airbnb a pop-up camper, and also using it for our family and making some money, hopefully, with that. Now, that all comes back to conversations I had with Riley. And I just want to hear this from you. And I want you to just talk about why generational wealth is important, and then what you've been doing, because you've been doing something very unique that is working, and I think is actually replicable. And so for me, I've started with baby steps, but I would just love to hear you talk, man, because God's used you to change my life in a really positive direction. And I want guys to hear about it.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of one of these ideas that's almost so big. It's like, where do you start? But I will start with just the concept of generational wealth, and we can weave my story into some of it. But, I'll admit this too from the get-go. It's not that one day I woke up and I read a thing or I had this epiphany and said, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take off doing it. The Lord has been good to just guide. And that's a theme that I will mention from the get-go, because that's a theme that as you think about building multiple streams of revenue, having productive property, building your home economy, all these things, you'll find that that's a theme that you must lean on repeatedly, just continually, is that God works out the steps that you need to take. Like, Proverbs says, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And that's been very much the story. And so God has just been good to teach me these things over the last few years. And I stumble along and just try to keep doing what I see that he's leading me to do. But here's the cool thing that I woke up to in doing this and realized is that God's word talks a lot about building wealth. And you mentioned this at the get-go. There's a lot of our generation, say 30s and under, mid 30s especially, that learned a lot of things from our elders above us that was not like, they didn't teach poverty gospel, but it was borderline poverty gospel. And it was this sort of mentality of sell everything, go on missions, and live for the Lord in poverty. And we saw a lot of our elders, and I don't even need to name names, but but a lot of folks that taught that and even sort of did that. And it was shaping, and a lot of us kind of grew up under this mentality of like, it's sort of more holy to be poor. Like Christians shouldn't be rich, right? And we, maybe even if no one said that, that's when you look around at our churches, that's kind of what you see. And yet at the same time, you have this other side of the coin where our churches are pretty obsessed with material goods and very cultural. And so they tend to just be poor and stay poor. And I've wondered in my life, was it the chicken or the egg? Like, are you justifying your poorness as more holy and righteous because you're just bad at business and bad at money management, or what? And so I've grappled with these things. And if anyone has ever listened to your podcast, Jared, they know that we had a conversation on there, particularly keyed for pastors, on building side hustles and income, because I realized how poor most Christians were, especially how poor pastors were. And so this is stuff like I was on the path to become a pastor and started thinking this stuff through and realizing I was going to be poor for the rest of my life. My wife wanted to have kids. And so just thinking this stuff through and realizing this didn't make a lot of sense because, scripture says in Proverbs 22:7, and this is not something you'll hear pastors preach on, but this is what it says: the rich rule over the poor. And then you'll hear him teach on, and the borrower is slave to the lender. But they don't mention the first part usually of the rich rule over the poor, unless it's like, so you're going to be ruled over. And I started thinking, well, why don't we just become the rich as Christians, And this is something that the Jews have figured out pretty, like that's a thing in their community. Like they build wealth, they work hard, and they achieve rulership quite often throughout human history because the Jews had that figured out. Christians have sort of adopted this like, well, the borrower is slave to the lender and I'm always the borrower. And so anyways, I started thinking about this, and the one verse that, anyone who's listened to you, Jared, much, or most of the guys in the Honor God Network will hear us talk about a lot is Proverbs 13:22, where it says, the righteous man leaves an inheritance. Often this is quoted as like, the righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children, but the verse actually says to his children's children. So we're talking generational wealth. We're talking a lot of wealth, and we're talking that only happens unless it's buku gobs of riches, which is like the 1% that most of us won't be. That usually happens because of productive property, which is exactly what we're talking about here. The way you leave an inheritance to your children's children isn't a massive bank account. Typically, it's productive property. So you're passing on tangible goods that continue to renew and make money for your family. And so this is something, like I said, I started like realizing as I was working through the process of becoming a pastor, and we stumbled into wanting a house and realizing we were so poor because I had been in ministry for so long that I was like, okay, wife, if you want a house, this is the junker it's got to be, and we got to buckle down and fix it up. And so long story short, we fixed up a house working every day for 10 months straight, never missed a day. Every single day we worked. And I don't know if I'd recommend that or not to someone, but it's what we did. And in the end, it was a beautiful home. I'm actually, anyone watching the video, I am sitting in it right now for reasons I could get into. We're emptying it out because we're renting it now. But after that, people started coming and saying, can you do this kind of work? And I said, guess so. I've got all the tools. I've learned a lot of stuff. And that was the start of getting the ball rolling. And I had grown up seeing this. Like my father runs a ranch, and I was the fourth generation myself. He was third generation on this family ranch. And so we have cattle and, horses and chickens, and we did farming. And so farming and ranching, all the above, lots of land. And so I had grown up sort of under this mentality of like being your own boss and just kind of going to work and building out tangible value in the world that you could pass on or that you could turn into productive property. So this wasn't like a totally new concept, but I felt called to ministry. So I just kind of stumbled into this. And then after I realized people wanted to pay me to do it, I said, okay, I'll do another one or two. And to fast forward, so we don't just ramble on about my whole story, fast forward, last week, we just closed on our third house that is a productive property rental house, and really great land. It's actually right next to you, Jared. And because that's part of the fun of this, you can start having a lot of fun with your friends, be like, oh, let's buy near him, and let's go over there, and let's partner with this friend. And then also, so we live in another house that's rent free.
Let me interrupt real quick.
Yeah.
We'll plug that. Other people can go ahead and look for property in Carbondale, Illinois. This is I think the second episode in a row that we plugged this. And just go ahead and purchase and take over Carbondale, Illinois with Riley both and myself and whoever else moves here. We're still praying both in. So, okay.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's exactly the value of this thing is when you start thinking like this, you start realizing that you can affect whole communities, you can change whole regions. And if Christians would get this in their blood, we could change entire states and work out from there to entire nations. And this is why we've let our nation go. There was once upon a time where Christians understood this. The Puritans knew this, man. They were hardworking people that took ownership of the land and ran a whole community. And I mean, even our nation, this is a whole another side tangent I won't get into, but I'll just mention this. Our nation had states could have their own official churches. I mean, they understood this idea of Christians implementing culture through ownership and wealth, and the rich ruling over the poor. The Christians worked hard, and Scripture says if you don't work, you don't eat. And so there was this mentality of like, let's do this thing. Like, we're here to work. We're here to take dominion. And your eschatology plays in a lot of this, and that's something we can talk about. But we once knew this, but my theory is Christians in America got really lazy and wealthy and comfortable, and we just started consuming, and we let go of production to pagans. And so now we are ruled in this country by pagans. And so it's time that we start thinking about this and building this up. And I'll just end with it. I mean, there's so much more we could say. I could go on and on and on, but I'll end with this right here for now. And that's, the thing I tell a lot of guys, young men, is you need to start doing the hard things so that you're working hard and building up wealth and thinking about business and productive property and things, so that you're free as a Christian to say the hard things, because we are now entering into a time, and this is why this matters. Your family, yourself and your family, if you want to stand as a Christian, is going to be persecuted. You were just mentioning this or alluding to this, and that is why this really matters. You need to equip your family with resources and wealth so that they're not having to bow to the culture right now, the pagan culture that's ruling over them, and they can stand up and say hard things and be a Christian witness and bless people, bless people with that wealth, which will draw many people into the kingdom of Christ. So much we could say, but that's just like a flyover with a little bit of my story mixed in and why this matters and how I've realized this matters. And man, it's been so wonderful because we are doing cool things now. And I'll mention this because we might touch on this. This is something that you and I have talked about. We're thinking now about buying properties for our kids, training our kids up in this, teaching them finances as well, so they can take over. And this is something Jared and I have talked about. It's really exciting when you start thinking like this. You start thinking like, we're strengthening our family and my children and then my children's children, and we're taking dominion for Christ. So yeah.
It's good. It's very good. Okay. I want to get into some practicals about what you have going on, Bo. And Riley, phenomenal job. Just like Bo did, great job setting that up and explaining what you're doing, what you got going on. And I want to bring this down to just some scalable models, because I think Bo is recognizing some gifts that God has given him and then using that to turn a profit. And to go back to one point that you made, Riley, wherever anybody is listening right now, wherever they're listening to this, if they're in a home, in their office somewhere, we all live in or work in productive property, either owned by ourselves or owned by somebody else. So it's going to be owned by somebody, and it's making somebody money. And the question is the products that we use. We either are producing something to sell, or we're consuming something that somebody else sold to us. So if we can think through that, if we can think through things that way and recognize, okay, I want to be the one that people are coming to, that I have an abundance to give generously, or to loan, or to take care of a person in need. I want to be that person. And, the scriptures regulate our generosity. So as God gives us what he gives us, we bless our family with it. We bless our church with it. And then out of the overflow of those things, we bless the poor among us. And there's a regulated way that generosity works in the scriptures. But let's get down to some details here, because, I've got in my home a piece of furniture that Bo Hutch just made and sent to me all the way from Colorado. And I just want to hear what you're doing as you're thinking through this, Bo, because I think we can see two different scalable models here. Riley's buying homes, remodeling homes, and then you've started this side business working with your hands. So explain that to get some guys thinking through possibilities.
Absolutely. So one thing that I want to add in, we talk about productive property, so we talk about wealth and cash and resources, but one form of wealth that I think is really, really valuable that isn't talked about much is just the idea of having skills, right? Having skills to be able to do stuff and being teachable enough to learn new skills. And I think that's
Right.
so huge and such a big piece to this idea of productive property. And yeah, you want to be in a place to where you can either learn something new or you have certain skills. Maybe you're not using them on the day to day, but you have skills that you can use in order to do this productive property thing. So I think skills is a huge thing to, pass on to our kids as well and to those around us for sure. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of doing. My vocation right now is full-time ministry, but I've got some experience and skills on the side that I've been able to put into use to make a little more money and potentially grow some stuff. So kind of at least two things. I kind of have a background in kind of rough and carpentry and then kind of finer woodworking. So especially during COVID, when the church was kind of slow and things were shut down, I really used those skills for rough and carpentry and concrete, to do that during a lot of 2020. So helping guys build houses, hang trusses, frame walls, all that stuff, pour concrete. I poured concrete growing up in high school and in college during the summers, and that's a skill, that has stayed with me that has paid dividends even now. Being 10 years out of high school, 5 years out of college. So those skills that I have and utilize over the past year, and then kind of the finer woodworking skills that Jared alluded to. My son was born last year in 2020, and before he was born, my father-in-law actually partnered on this cradle, and when we built that cradle, it was like, wow, like I could do that. I didn't really realize that building such a seemingly complex piece of furniture, I never thought that I could ever do that. Just simply walking through the instructions, walking through the book, having a little help from my father-in-law, I figured out I could do that. And that was a lot easier than I thought it was. So that's what I did. I made Jared a cradle after that and made a couple of friends here locally a cradle. And yeah, that's a potential productive property way that I could go, using those skills and trying to grow something like that, something that can be, maybe not be productive property. That's property that hopefully, that cradle will stay in your family for a long time, Jared. Right. And my cradle that I made for my son will stay in for a long time, so I think utilizing those skills is important. So that's kind of what I've got going on and have been able to utilize. And like I said, these aren't something that I'm engaged in full time, but they are things that I have kind of in my toolbox that I can pull out when the need arises. So
That's good, man. Those father-in-laws know their stuff, don't they?
they do.
I've got a father-in-law that is a jack of all trades, and he does everything excellently. Yeah. And I've learned so much from him. So it's almost like, as I'm hearing you guys talk and I'm thinking about my life. So I'm 38. I've got a couple of years on Riley, and then a little bit more on you, Bo. And I'm a different man today than I was 10 years ago. And the skills that you're acquiring, Bo, right now, when you're 38, those are going to be, so much more developed than they are right now. And, there's something that happens in your 30s where there's opportunities that come. And as you are faithful through your 20s with the responsibilities that God has given you, somehow or another, things just come your way. And it's not a matter of having to go out and look for certain things to come your way. It's so often where opportunities come to your lap because your relationships with your friends and your buddies, as you grow, you get more, you're into middle management. You start to have a guy for everything. I know a guy for that. I know a guy for that. And then opportunities just come. And it's almost like guys need permission to pursue generational wealth. Like, hey guys, it's okay. You don't have to be scared that if you love money, it can destroy you. But if you love God, money can be a tool for his glory and for the good of a lot of people. Don't fall in love with it. Like, don't let it get your heart. You've got to be careful with that. But out of the fear of the possible idolatry that's there, don't paralyze yourself into to never pursuing something that could be beneficial to your children and to your grandchildren. You need permission, and you have permission to do that. So, I'm doing this camper thing, and I'm trying to think through, like, it was terrifying to me to put an offer on a house. I put an offer on a house, and this may, really, again, turn your attention to Southern Illinois, but there was a house that I put an offer on for $80,000. It was a remodeled double wide on an acre of property in wine country here. And I put that offer in, and I tell you what, it was terrifying for me. I put that in, closed it. I could barely sleep that night. And Riley, I think you've been through that before, but out of fear, it's easy to let that, and that deal fell through, and I could have pursued that further, but I stopped that and then did the camper thing. It's a little bit lower barrier of entry, and it cost me less than $3,000 to get in rather than 80. But the idea is to circle back around to that, and to go back, and then to eventually, what would be phenomenal is if I could give my family, my two sons and my daughter, either land, or if I can give them a home when they turn 18, and have been training them for these last 10, 15 years, to where they're ready to step into early adulthood, and to be able to make money, and to be able to understand how money works, and to not be in love with money, to recognize that these are tools, they're not treasures. And that's an important distinction: tools, not treasures. And so for you guys, what's your plans then? I'm just curious, as you're thinking and dreaming a little bit, let's just on air dream a little bit. And maybe as we're dreaming, men, as you're listening in, be thinking through, look at your hands. What has God given you gifts to do? Is it right? Is it to be in media? Scott Tungay, one of our co-hosts, is always talking about, what gifts do you have? Okay, use those talents, spend those, go out and do what God has called you to do. So as you're hearing about this and thinking about possibilities, this might not even happen in the future, but just possibilities of what we're thinking through. All right, pray about it. Talk to your wife about it. Think, okay, how can I build productive property? How can I own physical assets and do this for the long haul? So guys, whoever wants to go. What's your long-term plan? Riley, go for it, man.
Yeah, I love this topic, and let me just say why I'm glad you're asking this question, because I think this is one of the best ways men can learn to think business-wise, to think strategically, is to just dream out loud with other guys who are like-minded in this stuff, and want to pursue this and have some ambitions and some drive for this. Because as you just dream, and I think that comes pretty naturally to most men, just dream and say like, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? You'll start to strategize and see things different and bring in multiple perspectives. And this is how you learn to do this. So I love this. Before I answer that question though, and I really want to do that talk, I do want to just reiterate one of the things you were saying, because I think it's really important to acknowledge this, that the risk of having this conversation, the risk of putting this podcast out there for guys to listen to, is of course that some people will hear this, and there will be a type of guy that hears this and says, oh yes, because really deep down, he's fearful of being poor. He's fearful of depending on God. And he says, oh, great. So I can get rich and make money, and he'll want to go after it for that reason. And my caution to that guy would be, that is not what we're talking about. We are talking about money as a tool for the kingdom. And there is always risk in this. There is always risk. And some guys are much safer and just more like from all the sovereign foundations in their life and whatever, much safer to just take a paid gig with a steady paycheck and do that. And there's really no shame in that. Like, I don't want to be shaming that approach. And because that's the other risk of having this conversation, is some guys could hear this and feel like we're kind of shaming that and poo-pooing that, like, oh, this is the only cool way to be, like, be an entrepreneur and stuff. And like, neither of those are true. And in either way you go, you're always going to have the risk of loving money too much. And that's what scripture says. It's not, it's not money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil. But our approach is simply, money is a great tool. So love God, and therefore get a bunch of money to use it for the kingdom and serve Christ's kingdom with it. So I just wanted to reiterate that, because it's something I see come up a lot. And I've had a lot of guys want to get into business with me that ended up being like, they would have been terrible business partners. I've had this a few times now, 3 or 4 times, that God really protected me from getting in business with guys that had no business doing it, but have wrong motivation. So anyways, that's stuff that's hard to like explain and work out. But I just wanted to reiterate it because it's an important thing. Guys come into this from a lot of different perspectives. And those things I wanted to say. Money's a tool. And also with what you were saying, Jared, it's really okay for guys who are like, okay, money's a tool. I want to get into this, but I do have a steady job. This is especially relevant for guys that have a family and children. Like, don't bet it all. Don't go buy a house because like someone did this and it can work. Like, you do need to be cautious, and it's okay to step into it small, like get a camper, remodel it, Airbnb it, learn the ropes and build up a little money and a little more courage and be like, okay, I can do this, and move up. So like again, no shame in any of that. I had some notes on that. I just wanted to reiterate it before we got too far away from that, because I think what you said was really good there. And it's totally okay to start small, ease into it. Don't bet the whole farm, especially if you have wife and children. But anyway, so my dreams now, to talk about your question, because I've been at this a while, I was alluding to this in the last, in the first question you asked, but I've started now thinking, okay, I want to get property that I leave to each of my children. And Lord willing, we're going to have a bunch of children. We have 2 already. The oldest is only 2.5 years old. So I'm starting this, we've got time to get it here. And we want to have property where each of our children has a house. And I start teaching them money is a tool. Let's think about it. Let's think about how, like, what are profit margins? How do we make budgets? How do we, deal with people? How do we deal with complaints? How do we fix things? How do we work with our hands? And I thought what Bo said about the skills, it's absolutely true. It's so good, where skills are a real wealth. So let's teach you the skills. Both my sons and my daughters will know how to use tools and work with their hands and all this, because there's so much goodness that comes from that knowledge and learning that young, because you learn to look at the world and be like, I can do this. I can do this. I don't have to fear anything going on here. I can do this, and I can serve people well, and I can serve my family really well. So our plan at this point, our big dream is to get to a point where we have enough property that each of our kids can have one of the houses, and our family is well enough established that we're making a lot of passive income, and I can go back into pastoral ministry. Hopefully, my prayer is to be an elder in a church and do a lot more pastoral ministry and have a side income, a passive income, mostly passive, that's funding that, where perhaps I wouldn't even need to take a salary from the church. And I can train a bunch of other men and families in that church to think like this and work like this, and maybe employ people in the church. And we have livestock right now. We might always have some livestock and do that. My wife and kids love their chickens and cows and whatnot. So there's all of that in there too, because that's productive property that once a year replicates itself. So that's pretty nice. That's a pretty nice gig, really, if you can keep them. So that's the short of it. There's a lot more details in there if you want me to get in it, but that's the big idea.
Awesome.
And
awesome.
the cool thing with this is, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier. Once you get a ball rolling on this is how wealth works. It is true that the wealthy get more wealthy and the poor tend to get more poor. And that used to really bother me. Like, it used to really bother me, sort of this bleeding heart, socialist type mentality. And then I realized that's the way of the world, no matter how many socialists there are. That will always be the case. And so the good thing to do as a Christian is to get that ball rolling and get that wealth and start taking dominion with it, and then be a generous Christian and bless others with it. And so at this point, the way you get into this is you just get a ball rolling, you just start. And eventually, so our houses will pay for the next house, and then they'll pay for the next house. And that's how this works. You don't even have to have a ton of money to get started on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so good. And guys, I want to encourage you to reach out to us. Reach out to us. If you got any questions, feel free. And based on our availability, we'll get back with you and talk to you about it. And, I'm thinking about this, Riley. Okay, what's better, for a wicked person to have wealth and use it according to their wicked desire, or for a godly person to have wealth and to use it as God would have them? And you think about the rich, the righteous, and that's funny. The wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. And as we use the power and the wealth that God would bless us with right now, whatever you have right now, using it all for God's glory now, living generously as the Lord gives, and if he gives more, okay, then it's going to be good for those who are around that wealthy person, because that person is living for the glory of God. Okay, so Bo, tell us, man, dream out loud, man. What's your plans? What you got going on as you guys are thinking through productive property and acquiring skills and long-term kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm glad to talk to you about it, because I think I've talked my wife completely. I've like
Our
over,
poor
you know,
wives, right?
yeah, seriously.
Like, our
It's
poor-
like constant, like, oh, you want to talk about this again? Oh, you want to talk about this again? You know, so I'm glad that I could finally talk to somebody else who is excited to talk about these things. So really, you know, the goal, right, is Psalm 128. You know, blessed is every man who fears the Lord. You shall work and you shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine in your house. Your kids will be like olive shoots around your table. I mean, that's the biblical pattern of the good life, right? And that's what we all want. You know, we want to work hard. We want to eat the fruit of the labor of our hands. We want our wives to be fruitful. We want our children to be fruitful. We want to see our children's children. We want to see the prosperity of Jerusalem, you know, as it were. So, you know, that's the goal, right? We just want to live the biblical picture of the good life. And I think, you know, for me, that means, you know, acquiring these skills. You know, skills are not only a form of wealth, but I want to, you know, live a life, you know, that is interesting, you know, that I can do a lot of stuff, you know, like your father-in-law, Jared, who, you know, he's got a solution for every problem. You know, he's been around the block a few times. He's the seasoned dog. He knows, you know, what's up. And I think that's, you know, kind of the life that I'd like to live, you know, pursuing these things. You know, you think about a lot of the biblical characters, you know, they lived these lives. You know, Abraham was the head of his house of over 300 men, you know, and he was a very competent man. And David and even Jesus himself, you know, being a carpenter, being competent in that world. And, you know, so, you know, pursuing those things, you know, being a generalist, as it were. So I think that all that stuff is huge, you know, and I think even if there were to come a time where I would have to, you know, leave the ministry for whatever reason and step into the secular world, I could really see myself, you know, maybe potentially starting a business. And I would love to hire young men, right? I think hiring young men to disciple them, to help them to build skills. I mean, I think there's you know, we talk about the pandemic of 2020, but there really isn't a pandemic, you know, or at least an epidemic in America of solid young men who have skills, right? Nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to put in the work ethic or put in the effort. So I think that, you know, potentially doing that and helping young men along the way, I think can be really huge, you know, whether it's a weekend project, whether it's a full-time employee, whatever the case is. So
yeah,
yeah,
good,
things
man.
like that. So yeah,
It's good stuff.
Dude, I want to touch on that because Bo, I think that's huge. That's part of what's so important about this topic is one of the best ways I've found to disciple young men, and one of the best ways I've been discipled, is to work shoulder to shoulder with other guys. And there is such a father starvation in our country and in our society, and really around the world, and in so many countries. There's such a father starvation and young men that are hungry for stuff. I've had guys just say to me, like, I don't know how to change a tire. I don't know how to change oil, you know? And when we first bought this house that I'm sitting in right now, it was our first house we ever did. And I was still on staff with the church and pastoring there, basically associate pastor in this church plant. There were so many young men that came and said, "You've got tools and a house to work on. When can I come over? I want to learn. I want to know this stuff." And so I would just teach them. And a lot of it I was figuring out as I would go, but I'd stay up till like 3 a.m. watching YouTube videos, and then I'd come over here to the house, and then they'd come over and I'd teach them what I learned and see, like, here's how a furnace works. Here, we're going to take this apart and figure out how it works. And the guys loved it. And it's such a great way. Like since then, see, I'd said there was 4 houses plus the one we live in. So one we flipped. We have 3 that we've kept. One we flipped. And on that one in particular, I had guys come over and just work day in and day out, including the guy that I had the end buyer for it before we even started. And I said, here's the deal. You have to come work every day. And I taught him so much stuff. And there's so many times for just long conversations, like just discipling conversations, even me learning from him in a lot of ways. And he was just a young guy that he's actually going into seminary school. And it was so good. Like, this kind of work is a great way to influence and disciple young men. And guys are hungry for it. They are so starving for it. So I think that's just a great point that you brought up there.
yeah. I mean, think about if all of us had something where we could take 2 or 3 guys along. Maybe it's not, you know, 5 days a week, but if we can just start introducing them to these concepts and stuff, that would be, you know, that could have a, you know, exponential, you know, growth and stuff like that. So yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
That's an episode in itself we could talk about in the future, as masculine discipleship, side by side discipleship. A couple years ago, I had stopped drinking coffee with buddies and people that I was discipling in our church. And instead of the men coming over and drinking coffee, I mean, if it's like 1,000,000 degrees outside, or if it's raining or storming, we'll still do that. But primarily, we go and get in my $200 golf cart, and we drive down to the pond and we fish together, or we do projects together. So we build something together, we work on something, and Brandon and I, for about 6 months, we went back and forth on projects that our wives had for us. Here you go, we want you to do this. So I would go help Brandon. The next week, Brandon would go help me. I mean, that's a great thing to talk about. So we'll drop an episode about that at some point. But yeah, Riley, go for it.
Yeah, that's great. One more dream I wanted to mention that Bo reminded me of when he was talking, just a future dream idea here. And this one is going to make me sound like a crazy to those who are not regular listeners to the Men of the Honor God Network and are kind of in tune to the rise of the patriarchy being cool again. But that's okay, because this is an awesome dream that my wife is pumped about. And this is more on my wife's side of things. But one of the things that has come up in the last month or so, as we've been talking about having a large family and lots of kids and just running a productive household economy, is that we need to bring back servants of the house. And we've been talking about, we now have a desire, we're even planning into our future home that we plan to build in the near future, servants quarters, basically where we could hire young ladies that would come and serve my wife. Because here's the thing that, like, a lot of people get really weird when it comes to like a stay-at-home wife, and we have so many different pictures of it, right? Like the feminists all think we just have this idea of like the 1950s housewives that just have skirts and sit around all day and do nothing, and then when you come home, they're like, I've made a pie and dinner and everything's, you know, spick and span and clean. But that's not really like the historical and even biblical housewife model, right? It was a very productive household, and feminists do get one thing right. Most of the change of our society to a post-industrial type society and stuff leaves women pretty worthless if they're just sitting at home, just twiddling their thumbs, because the household isn't very productive anymore. And so we've been looking at like, how do we make the household a whole productive thing? That's why I was talking about like giving properties to my children and teaching them to work and having livestock, all these things. But my wife is excellent at knitting and like sewing and making clothing for the children and livestock. She handles all the chickens and things like that. So we've been talking about this, but one of the things we've realized is when you start adding a bunch of kids into the mix, things get really messy, and there's not always enough time in the day to clean the house, to wash the dishes, to cook all the meals, all these things that are part of a productive household. And we started realizing, just like there's a father starvation, most women, even in the church, have not done what scripture commands, where the older women train up the younger women. And so there's women that are starved to, like, Margot gets messages, my wife, all the time through Instagram and stuff, ladies being like, how do you know how to do this? Can you train me how to do this? And we've got young ladies in our church where we live asking her to come over and train her how to like sew and knit and things like that. And so we started saying, what if in the near future we get enough wealth built up, and it doesn't even take a whole lot of wealth to do this, but we get mainly like some property where, say you brought in some college age gals that could live with you, and they could learn how to birth kids, because we're doing that at home. We've done that too. They could learn how to raise kids, discipline kids, clean, cook, sew, run a productive household, all these things. That there's a lot of young ladies that actually want to do that because they've read their Bibles and they want to be at home and serve their family and be homeward oriented, like scripture commands. And they're rejecting these feminist ideals, but have not had a church that teaches them those things. And so that's one of our long-term dreams, is like, we want to be able to employ young ladies to help my wife and even house them and pay for that and all that. So,
man, that's awesome. It's crazy because within the last week, I'd been thinking about that. I'd read a book earlier this year called The Puritan Family, and it was really interesting to hear how the Puritan family would work and how they viewed their life. And that's very, very fascinating. All right.
Well, the Proverbs 31 woman. Sorry, I'll just say this real quick. Most people say like, look, that's a working woman, right? See, she should be able, but if you read that honestly, that's a homeward oriented woman who the man has equipped so well and resourced so well that, yes, she's able to take the wealth of that family and expand it, but it's still homeward oriented. And she's doing business, but it's homeward oriented, caring for the family. And she's just killing it with the resources that the man has provided. And so that's my encouragement to men listening to this, is like, resource your wife, train her, teach her, and she'll eat this stuff up because you're giving her security and letting her go with what God has made her to do. And women love this. Like, as you do your job as a man in this stuff, and you know, the household is an economy, whether you like it or not. It is an economy. It's got multiple things going on all the time, and if you manage it well, it works. The family runs like a business, and most successful businesses have multiple revenue streams. So even if they're small ones, just get some trickling in, and resource your wife, and then let her do that too, and you'll be amazed at like how fruitful it becomes.
Yeah, it's interesting about the Proverbs 31 passage, because the woman discovers that what she's doing for her family is profitable early in the chapter. And then she sits on that and doesn't bring it to market until later in the chapter, after and out of the overflow of taking care of her family.
Exactly.
So her gifting and her business and her entrepreneurial ideas don't take her heart and take priority over the home. It's an overflow of the home until the proper time. She sits on it till the right time, which is fascinating. But okay, so maybe these guys are listening and thinking, okay, man, Riley, Bo, Jared, it'd be great to sit down and talk with them, but I'm sitting in, you know, Honolulu, Hawaii, or I'm sitting in the middle of nowhere, Texas, or I'm sitting in, you know, Virginia, and I feel like I'm all alone. And here's what I want you to, I want you to encourage you with this. I'm going to bring my father-in-law back in on this. Okay. So my father-in-law grew up, he had a brother and a sister, and went to college. And immediately when he was 21, right out of college, got a job as a teacher. He gets married, lies about his age to the woman that he's now married to, because he wanted to marry her and she was older. And they went to the courthouse. And then my mother-in-law found out that she was older than my father-in-law the day they got married. And she was shocked, and she still married him. But he borrowed money. He bought a house and flipped a house and made some money on it, borrowed $15,000 from his father, and then purchased land in the middle of nowhere. Tiny little area, purchased like 9 acres, and built his house, and took like a year and a half. And he had never built a house before, and just built it. He built his house on his own as a teacher, on a teacher's salary. And then within just a couple of years, paid that house off. My mother-in-law never had to work outside of the home. She worked as a teacher's aide for a few years, but my father-in-law took small opportunities as they came. He worked very hard, and he was also a preacher on the side. So he'd be an itinerant preacher, and he'd go and preach on the side. And he kept acquiring skills, and he can do, like I said, he's a jack of all trades. But what my father-in-law ended up doing is, like 25 years after, when he retired, he sold his house for 8 times more than what he had in it. I mean, just an amazing amount of money more than what he put into it. Went and built a new house, and has done such a phenomenal job of making wise decisions over the years, wise investments, wise decisions, working hard, taking opportunities beyond just his job as a teacher, as a science teacher. And so now Dennis has done what we're talking about doing. My father-in-law has done that. And so if you'll look around, as you guys are listening in, think about the men in your church, think about the men in your community, think about their history. They may not be spiritual giants, but there are men around you, like my father-in-law, that you can say, man, I just want to talk to you about what you've done in your life and what God has done in your life. And can we just spend some time together? And, you know, it may not be the best time. It may not be, you know, a buddy relationship for the next 20 years where there's this amazing discipleship relationship, but find guys like that and learn from them, and then be that kind of guy where 20 years from now, those guys are seeking you out. They're saying, hey, I know a guy that's done this. And, you know, as you sit and talk to that guy in 20 years, you're going to be like, man, God has been so faithful. He's given me mentors. He's helped me. He's given me awesome opportunities. He's given me his law to be able to live my life. He's been so gracious to me to save me and forgive me and train me up as a man over the years. And let me help you along the way. And you become that guy that, 20 years down the road. And so you can find them. They're out there. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a very good word, because there's a lot of men out there who maybe don't even think like we do in these terms, but they love to share their knowledge, and they love to, like, Christian men who maybe aren't thinking like patriarchy and build the household and take dominion and all this stuff like a lot of us talk about, but they still care about other people, and they care about the guys in their church. And one of the best mentors I had was a very different theology than me, super egalitarian man who was a high up guy in the marketing industry and for a very big company. And he was like the vice president and over all the marketing and stuff. When I first started my first business, which was a magazine business a few years ago, it was real successful, sold a lot of ads and did a lot of writing and all this stuff. He was very interested in that. And he was a huge blessing to me where, I couldn't like go to work with him or anything, but he had time in the mornings. If I'd get up early, we could meet for coffee, and occasionally in the evening sometimes. And I would just ask him questions, and he would ask me things and help me talk through and think through things. And he just took an interest because I was out there getting things done. I expressed to him that I could use help, and I was, just learning as I went. And he blessed me greatly with just conversations. And we had very different theology, but I leaned into that and used and gleaned wisdom from him. And then the other thing is with guys that, you just apply wisdom, guys, listening to this. There's other guys where you can look at him and say, I could just volunteer my time to help him. And that guy, I guarantee you, would take you along and you could learn from him. Most of my work these days is like, I would love if a guy just came to me and said, can I just work with you? I'll just be another set of hands and help you. I'd be like, absolutely. And I would pour out knowledge to that guy and just help him as pay for that work, And so if you guys want to learn, there's always a way to do it. And then with my other business that I haven't even touched on because it's not as flashy and cool, but I build websites these days. I started learning websites and all this tech stuff on my own like 13, 14 years ago with just free resources online. And I just started learning and started practicing and just would make my own blog look better and practice writing and then practice designing. And after 14 years of it, it started in about year 5, people started saying, hey, can you do this for me? And I just started taking small steps. And one of my other pieces of advice for young guys that are listening to this, besides seeking out mentors and volunteering your time and helping other guys so you can learn these skills and things, is just take small enough steps that you can't fail. Just start taking small steps and keep plodding along. That's my biggest secret and philosophy of all this work is take small enough steps that you can't fail. Just plod along. And over the course of 10, 20 years, I guarantee you will overestimate what you can do in a few years, and you will greatly underestimate the difference it'll make on you and your family and your opportunities in life. You'll greatly underestimate it over the course of 10 or 20 years. It will be remarkable if you just keep plodding along what you can do and getting mentors as you go and asking a lot of questions and just being humble and keep on learning.
That's good. Hey, Bo, you got any final words, man, as we get ready to close up?
I do, but I'm going to actually borrow the words of Mr. Wiley here to kind of wrap things up. This is towards the end of his book on his chapter on legacy. And he just talks about how, the kind of the subtitle is Abraham Today. And he talks about, let's say you become financially independent. He talks about maybe you started a business, you stayed with the same woman, you've got a couple, real estate properties and all that stuff. And he says, your net worth is somewhere probably around $3 million, not too shabby. He says the scenario I've just outlined is pretty much within the reach of many young men in the Western world today. You have to put your mind to it, though. It would mean managing your affairs well, staying put, starting a business of some kind fairly early, taking calculated risks, and above all, having a thrifty and supportive wife. Remove any of those things, and the chance of getting to this point is less likely. You also need persistence, a little frugality, some courage, and lots of common sense. So I would just leave it with that, man. I think, the possibility is ripe if we are wise and tough and have courage and take calculated risks and network and build skills. The Lord will bless us. So I think I'll just leave it there.
Man, that is dynamite. Fellas, this has been a lot of fun. I think this is a great 4th episode. Everybody listening in, please like this, share this, spread the word. Leave a rating, a review on iTunes. Everybody says that's a big help, so apparently it is. And thanks so much for continuing to come back. Riley, Bo, appreciate it, man. You guys did a great job.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on the mission with the Majesty's Men. For show notes, go to themajesties.men.com/show. There you can also submit questions and suggestions for the hosts. If you're interested in joining the Honor God Network, type in hnr.gd into your browser to learn more and apply. If you appreciate our mission and content and what we're building, we'd appreciate your support. Leave us a 5-star review where you listen to podcasts so that others can find the show. Financially support our efforts and strengthen the entire network by giving a one-time gift or set up ongoing support at themajesties.men.com/support. Be brave and share this show and other content on social media to help other men find content and community to reinforce them. Lastly, and most importantly, live what you've learned. Be good, stay dangerous, honor God in all you do. We'll see you out there, brothers.